Well, a very, very good morning to you. It's exactly 20 minutes before 8 as we come to you live from Cape Town this morning. We're broadcasting from the Parliamentary Precinct, the beautiful cable cars going up and down Table Mountain. You know, a sight that you weren't really seeing much, were you, during the time when tourism came to a grinding halt due to COVID-19. Well, things are really picking up again and people are visiting the country and you're finding that the economy is picking up. Things are looking a lot better than they were this time a year ago. However, there's a lot of clawing back that needs to be done. So you still need to carry on with everything that was put in place to alleviate the effects of COVID. Then add to that the fact that we were just on the brink of a recession before COVID began. And here we are in 2022 with a very, very different set of goals that we need to achieve on top of all of the challenges that we have. Well, that in a nutshell is what our Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, has to deal with today. So we're getting some analysis for you. We've got Kim Silverman, who's an economic analyst, who's going to chat to us a little bit more about some of the expectations and where we as a country find ourselves economically. Kim, good to see you. Welcome.
Yeah, good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. It certainly has been a while for everything. And it's nice to see South Africa opening up for business again. Things are beginning to look like they were before the pandemic, but we've got a long way to go in terms of growing this economy.
We really do. I mean, growth is 3% below where it was pre-COVID, and we lost 700,000 to 800,000 jobs, and we've only made back about 100,000 of those. So I think, people are really in dire straits. And the budget is also in a bit of dire straits. I mean, we had to borrow 700 billion to cover the costs of COVID.
700 billion rand are we talking?
700 billion rand. And we had to cut costs by 350 billion. And those cuts were wages and they were infrastructure, municipal infrastructure. So that's all the stuff that, is public services. We had to cut sewage at municipal level, sewage infrastructure, health infrastructure, education infrastructure. And those things are things that we need to get back on track with, but we can only do that when we start paying down that debt and when we start increasing GDP growth.
Yeah, and this is the reality, is that I want to focus a little bit on the country's debt right now, because obviously I know this is where you look in and your strong point. You've got a lot of organizations like the EFF, for instance. We're going to be chatting to them later. They're going to be marching here onto the budget speech to, stop all this borrowing, is that we're finding ourselves in a lot of debt. Is it, yes, I know it's a global phenomenon. I know that a lot of people, a lot of countries are in debt right now. But how are we handling this debt? Is it manageable?
Well, it's not really manageable. I mean, a rule of thumb is you need to grow at the rate at which you pay off your debt. So at the moment, our debt costs us on average 10%, and we're growing at around 4-5%. So you can see the mismatch there. And the end game is that you actually can't service your debt because you're not growing fast enough. So I think on that score, the EFF does have a point. But the only way we can reduce our debt is by sacrificing spending on things like COVID grants. And so Treasury really has to walk a fine line between paying down debt but still assisting those who are in need. And I personally think they've done quite a good job. And as you said, we're in a much better position post-COVID. And we're in a much better position post-COVID with respect to the budget. We thought that debt GDP could go up to 100%, and we're predicting now it will rise to around 75%. And that's a better picture. And just on the bonds, maybe just to note that while what's going on in Russia is very stressful for the global economy, what it means is a lot of the money that would go to those emerging markets in Europe is actually coming into South Africa. So strangely, we are seeing a lot more inflows into South African bonds, and we're borrowing at concessional rates now from the IMF and the World Bank, and that's making our debt cheaper.
Yeah. That's an interesting point to touch on, because I wanted to actually bring in what is happening in Russia and the Ukraine and the effect that it's going to have on us. Obviously, we're seeing increasing oil prices, although they have been high. I mean, it's not something that we haven't seen. We've been seeing these increasing oil prices. I want to talk to our currency as well and the effect that it's having on our currency. We did drop below the 15 mark for a little short period. We're back above it. We're going to see petrol increasing at this point in time. What is the instability? What should we worry about? And will we see that resonating in the budget speech, the situation right now in Russia?
I don't think they'll refer to it in particular, but actually what's going on in Russia, strangely, as I said, is benefiting us because we're getting all of those flows, and we're so far away from what's going on in Europe. In a sense, we're a diversification for global investors from that risk. So we're also seeing commodity prices rise. It's not just oil, it's the stuff that we export. And that's giving us this revenue that we didn't think we would have, which is allowing us to continue the COVID grant, and we're using some of it to pay down debt. And that's where Treasury is really balancing things out. So a lot of what we're seeing going on offshore is assisting us with corporate tax revenue. When it comes to the currency, our currency is a commodity-linked currency. If things like coal and iron ore and platinum do well, which they are doing well on the back of not only global supply chain blockages, but also on the back of the switch to environmental ESG away from, on the platinum side, away from coal. So, we are benefiting from a lot of the global trends, and we see that in the currency. I think, while it did depreciate, we're seeing it being a lot more stable than other emerging market currencies through this time. So a lot of the volatility that we see with the Federal Reserve Bank, that means that emerging market currencies, they react to that global volatility and often depreciate. And the rand's held up really well because of the commodity price boom that we've seen. Yeah.
I'm wanting to look at the tax base right now. We know it's shrinking, even though obviously the collection is going to be higher, and I think people are feeling a lot more comfortable by the fact that, compared to where we were last year this time, we are going to obviously see there's a lot more money to be playing with. But the tax bracket is shrinking.
Yes.
Unemployment is rising. The youth are not finding jobs. Many are saying this is a recipe for disaster. What we are looking at right now is not a healthy, functioning economy. Do you agree with sentiments like that? Or do you think we're trying to still find our feet? But, surely by now we sort of should see some growth somewhere.
Yeah. No, look, we spend 60% of our government spending on the social wage. Now that's huge, and then to add on top of that a basic income grant means what is going to be left to deal with things like road infrastructure and things that actually make your economy grow faster. So, we do need to rethink how we want to spend our money to ensure that we facilitate growth. But I think my kind of silver lining is what's going on in the energy sector, and we're seeing huge progress there. In the sort of 15 years that I've looked at Eskom, this is probably the best I've seen it in terms of the stars aligning and allowing our energy sector to finally unlock growth. And I'm hoping that in sort of 4 or 5 years' time we can start growing at 2.5-3% once we've unlocked the energy sector.
I suppose we need to. I'm not going to get into that, but that's an interesting perspective, and I hope that is the case, because we need to see the energy sector to enhance the investment into the country. However, one of my biggest problems is when you look at, as you mentioned, the infrastructure in the country. This is something we need to work on. The rail network. That is something that we should be utilizing. Our roads are in a shambles because we don't have a rail infrastructure that is good enough to be transporting goods. There's always a problem when it comes to that. Now, when we see investment into these kinds of things, this is obviously where we're going to see the economy start growing. But we need to sweat before that. But the thing is, we need to find the balancing act, because I was chatting to Kusatu beforehand that was saying they hope that they're going to see that COVID 350 grant go up to maybe 400 Rand at this time, and a lot of other grants going up. So if we keep on pumping money into grants for people that desperately need it, and we understand that, how do we keep on maintaining and developing infrastructure? Where does the balance come in?
Well, you need to decide what you want government to be. Are they going to be the sole providers of infrastructure? And if they are, then it's difficult to also provide social welfare and social support. So what a lot of countries do is they outsource the building of infrastructure to the private sector, but they do it under conditionality that they also need to take development needs into account. So that can become a win-win situation where the private sector, they take over the infrastructure build, which allows government to free up cash for welfare spending.
Yeah.
Which, as you say, when you look at our unemployment rate and you look at our education system, unfortunately, that's the burden that we're carrying. You can't just leave people to suffer. For me, that's the balance: is bringing in the private sector on the infrastructure side, which then I think can allow government to continue supporting South Africans with the social wage that they have.
Yeah.
But we really need to think how far, as a country, we want to stretch all of that. So you still need to provide basic services. And that means you can't have 100% of spending on the social wage. Otherwise, there will be no municipal services.
Yeah, and that's the reality. I have to wrap, and I know my director told me I've got to wrap, but I just want to. My last question to you is about this privatization, because already the hints coming through from the State of the Nation address was the fact, government is not the job creator; it is the private sector. Getting somebody in that is going to ensure that the red tape is taken out, putting under the presidency. So it feels like the Ramaphosa presidency is wanting a lot more privatization, but he's fighting against a big cause of the fact that there are many parties that don't want to see that happening, and they want to see that remaining under the government. So are you obviously of the private sector should be coming in and controlling a lot more, or taking out a lot more of the pressure from government and assisting?
Yeah, I think there can be a partnership there that can really work for all South Africans.
Well, we hope it does.
Yeah,
we hope it does, and it isn't
and
another.
It can, yeah.
I suppose it can. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Big one key takeaway you're looking for today from the finance minister?
I think we need to see a balanced budget, because you can't use all of it to pay down debt, and you can't use all of it in a social wage, and they have to divide up the winnings from the commodity price boom.
All right, I'm glad I'm not the finance minister.
Me
Good luck
too.
to hear you. Exactly. Kim, thanks for chatting to us today. Nice to see you again. All right, well, that's a little bit of analysis. I mean, you make what you will of this, but I know we're trying to bring it down to a level that we can all understand, because numbers and finance and business always sound like a very complicated tool, but the bottom line is it's your money and my money that we need to understand what it's being used for, and that's what we're going to be finding out today, and hopefully unpacking as much as we can.